4 people died and the Congress was evacuated and the National Guard activated when an angry mob fueled by disinformation from social media stormed the Capitol in January this year. This summer, we all got shocked by Pegasus, which is a spyware. It's commercial software which are sold to governments, such as the Hungarian government. And it leaves traces on people's devices, and that could be critical journalists or opposition politicians. And it is there. We all know it's there. We have state-sponsored cyber thralls who manipulate voters in other countries. So all these threats to our digital democracy, we know it's there. And so the question today is, how should the EU respond to it? I'm in the middle of Europe, as you see, and you all are. We have a participant from the US, I think, but otherwise we're all in the middle of Europe. So how should the EU respond to these things? And today we have Mr. Bart Groothuis, who is Dutch member of the European Parliament in the Renew Europe group, and in the Netherlands, you're in the Volkspartij voor Vrijheid en Democratie. Is that more or less? Thank you. Okay, and in the European Parliament, you're a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, and that is important because you are negotiating the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, and I hope you will come back to that and explain what that is. But you're also a member of the INGE Committee, which is the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the EU, including disinformation. And I think I will just call it INGE today, if that's okay. So welcome, Bart. And we do also have Morten Løkkegaard today. Morten Løkkegaard is also a member of the European Parliament, also in the Renew Europe group, and also in the INGE Committee. And in Denmark, you're in the party called Venstre. Welcome, Morten.
Thanks.
So, Bart, how do foreign actors exploit weaknesses in the EU's cybersecurity system? And how do we try to combat it? What's in this NIS2, which is the Commission's response to it? What's in that, and is it enough?
Yeah, tak, Fiebe. I'm
wow.
Indeed, tusind tak. As a great fan of Denmark, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I negotiate especially on cybersecurity legislation, the NIS2, and together with Morten and Inge. Then Morten has the same files as me, but that's why we hold each other's hand and we think alike. That's why we like to be in this spot. Let me just first set the stage on what I think is going on. Previously, I was 7 years, I was head of cybersecurity at the Dutch Ministry of Defense. And I've seen the threat only rising, right? But in 2019, cybercrime in the Netherlands was doubled. And in 2020, the FBI in the US says that ransomware worldwide tripled. That was horrifying. And in 2021, I speak to many security services across Europe, and they all say there's a new peak coming in. So there's apart from the pandemic, there's also a ransomware pandemic, right? Targeting health care institutions in Ireland, but also in Brno, in the Czech Republic, and in Spain. And it's not just criminal offenses, it's almost a crime against humanity. They also target governments. It's a trend. We were in Athens last week with Morten. And I think that governments are targeted more and more as well, not just by nation states, but also by ransomware attacks. But also supply chains are being targeted by. You can infect many hundreds of thousands of targets at once if you are in a supply chain. It's very interesting to see how these supply chains are targeted by hacks. But Morten and I are very worried. What if you are the supply chain? What if you have Russian or Chinese hardware inside your vital infrastructure? What does that do with the vulnerability of our societies? Those are the things that we are thinking about. Now, there's one other thing with ransomware I'd like to say from my experience that is new as well. It's not just criminality that is ransomware. It's also a foreign policy objective of the Russian state. We should be very, very aware. I served in Afghanistan, and Pakistan was, to our great disgrief, was supporting the Afghan Taliban and hosting them, giving a safe haven. And with Kalashnikovs, they fought us. But now, the Kalashnikov of our time is ransomware, because the Russian state has the objective to weaken us, divide us, weaken our economies. And ransomware is just another instrument in doing so. So I don't think it's just criminal law enforcement offense. It's also something that the European Union has to think about. A couple of groups in Russia are really disrupting so much in Europe that we have to think about how we deal with that. And I'll come back to that later. Now we have the Chinese as well. They've learned from the Russians how to put this information. I was in Athens with Morten, and Athens is the birthplace of democracy, but I would argue that disinformation is the birthplace of disinformation is in Russia. And if you would look at I'm from the Netherlands. We've seen MH17. We've seen the Trump election. We've seen Brexit, the COVID-19 vaccine disinformation campaigns. The QAnon was nurtured by Russian Internet Research Agency in its infancy. It was reported extensively. It is not good, my dear liberal and democratic friends. It is not good what is happening to democracy here. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's one by one, you would say, every instance or news message is not enough to respond to. If you would add it up, it is. Now, the Chinese are copying it, and I believe that what does it all have in common? It's our digital domain. We are becoming vulnerable, weak because of this digital domain. Why? Because I buy a TV, I buy bicycles, I'm Dutch, I buy them online. And why? Because ads and targeted ads, you can target people. Well, you can target people with products, but you can just as easily target vulnerable groups of people with ideas in the same domain. It's not just a marketplace, it's also a public sphere. And those 2 points of the same, that Europe has to address both problems. It's a marketplace that needs to be regulated and a public sphere. Now, what Morten and I don't want to speak for Morten, but what we get frustrated, we know a lot about information. We have data, we've had hearings, but we do not yet know the quite significant, the precise extent of disinformation campaigns. It's not just about the Russians spending $100,000 or $200,000 on ads on Facebook with the Trump campaign. It's about what electoral college exactly did they influence, and what street in Manchester in the 2016 referendum was exactly influenced from swinging back and forth. Has that influenced the outcome of the referendum? Those are questions we cannot answer. We don't have that data. So I think we got to get that data out. That is our task here in European Parliament, make sure the data comes out. So I know Twitter reports on Russian or Chinese disinformation campaigns, but I don't know what the same campaign had an effect on YouTube or on Twitter, or on Reddit, on you, etc. So I want it cross-sectoral. Those are things that we are asking for. And of course, disinfectant is the best inoculant or sunlight is the best inoculant to these operations. You could get it out in the open. That's what they disliked. But if it's being done covertly. So we need researchers, legitimate access seekers. They need to access this data. We need media. We need journalists. Can I just say here, I dislike, that's an euphemism, the word fake news. That is very akin to Lügenpresse, when you know German. It's very akin to, it's been coined by Steve Bannon. You shouldn't trust the media. You shouldn't trust journalists. Well, I think journalists and media are the solution to the problem, not the problem. I think we should enable them by doing research. But why is China invested 3 billion euros in media takeovers in Europe in the past 9 years? Is that not worrisome? Are we guarding our own democratic institutions in a way we could? But we should guard our liberal democratic societies. We shouldn't allow, for example, Russia Today and Sputnik to be henchmen of the Russian state. Yesterday, the Germans expelled Russia Today from YouTube. I think it's very good news. Now, 2 or 3 last things, and then I'll finish up. We're also looking at espionage and foreign influence. I think we need registers with whom you talk to. I'd also think that, let's say Sputnik, the Skripal case in the US was horrifying. But we've seen about 5 or 6 new occasions of the same unit traveling throughout Europe with other passports. Why are we not asking for biometrics like an iris scan? You can't forge that. So we need new tools to fight foreign interference in Europe, and we need more intelligence cooperation. The German, the Dutch, and the Danes, we are in a very comfortable position because we are in the forefront of this. We have good services. I think that the rest of Europe has to benefit from that. Now, two last remarks. I think that the rise of China needs more attention. We are very much engaged in looking at Russian disinformation, but China has stepped up the game. Since COVID-19, they've doubled their presence on Twitter, they've tripled their presence on Facebook, and the clickbait farms and others, it's expanding significantly. And that's why we as a Renew Group, we asked for a Far East task force, a new team that looks at China and disinformation. Two last things, party finance, very important. Look at Marine Le Pen in France. And one of the last things that we worried about is deepfakes. What we want is to make sure that we don't want these, if you just want a watermark that something is a deepfake, so it can't go viral without any scrutiny. And there's much more, Vida. We are full of ideas. We have so much that we can do in Europe to counter it. We are full of ideas, and we will make sure that we get some of them through. And thank you for inviting me. I hope this was some of an introduction to the problem. Back to you.
It was, Bart. Thank you. And I'm quite certain that Morten Løkkegaard, given his past, will agree a lot about the things you said about journalists and free journalists. So please, Morten Løkkegaard, how is the European Parliament and the Inge Committee? What are you doing? What are you doing specifically in this committee to fight the problem?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much to my good colleague Bart for attending. I think that it's obvious to everyone listening to this that Bart is really an expert. I am not. I'm quite new in this game. I have participated and be a member of the Internal Market Committee for a decade now. So my intro into this was entrance into this is market based. But on the other hand, as soon as I realized the scope here, the alarming figures that Bart so nicely have presented to us, I realized that this is a huge problem, and this needs much more political attention. And I'm coming back to the work in the Inge Committee in a minute, but I would just like to add to what Bart said so nicely. And I think that Bart, you are the reason that we are actually in the forefront as a group in the Parliament. I don't think that the listeners and the viewers here should make the mistake of thinking that this is the level of knowledge and communicating talents that we have in the Parliament concerning regarding this issue. You are absolutely our expert, and that's very good to have you on the team. What I realized when I saw these figures was that one of the things I'll come back to whenever I talk about this is the sentence you also said, death by 1,000 cuts. I think this is essential for the understanding of why we are where we are. We have not done as much as we should do. We are lacking behind, both in technology, but also in political terms. And I think you put it very nicely when you said that both the Chinese and the Russians and the criminals all over the world are much ahead. So what we need is to get our act together now, and that's precisely why we're doing the things we are. And the death by 1,000 cuts is a very good metaphor on what's going on, because the problem with this whole area, with this whole digital debate, is that for many years, too many years, it has been small cuts, and if you have one cut or even 10 cuts, you have no political reaction. When you have 100 cuts, people start to react, and now we have 1,000 cuts, and we have our whole systems under fire, and we need to do something. But because of this strategy, or because of this technology, where you can actually have this silent war, this creeping war, as I would call it, many of our political colleagues have been too late to understand, including myself. Well, what are we doing? Well, as Bart was saying, we have our day-to-day work in our committees. Bart is in the Industrial Committee, I'm in the Internal Market Committee, and in these committees we are dealing with the hard legislation. That's to say the NIS2, as we will come back to, and also the DMA, DSA, the ones that you are referring to, Eva, when you're talking about this Digital Service Act, which is hugely important for getting some kind of framework, legislative framework regarding our data. We might also have some discussion on that one. I would say the Inge is a special committee. Inge is a committee that has seen the day of light because we realized that we had this death by 1,000 cuts, and we needed to do something beside what we do legislative-wise. So this Inge committee has started its work in September last year. It was supposed to come up with the recommendations already this summer, but what we were looking at was, of course, a lot of information, a lot of experts, and a lack of knowledge by the members. So we needed more time. So we extended the scope a little bit, and now the time frame, and we now have we're now looking forward to come up with the recommendations in early next year, February, March. But Bart perhaps know more about the timeline that I do, but somewhere there in the spring. And what is the purpose? Yes, the purpose is, of course, to know more and to come up with recommendations on a broad level of issues. Bart was touching upon some of them. I will just come back to them now. We have 66 members of the House. 34 of them are full members. I'm one of the vice chairs. And we're led by a very prominent French guy, Luxman. He's a very well-known guy in French politics. We just realized last week when we were in Athens with him. He was recognized on the streets of Athens. Who will be that? Anyway, but we have a scope saying we have mainly three issues that we are looking into. Disinformation, which Bart has already presented to you, the whole issue of disinformation. We are on fire with a whole lot of disinformation, well-organized fake, and a lot of information which is not correct, which is actually false, and is overloading our societies and our electoral systems. This is legally wise, very, very difficult area to enter into. Well, why? Because when we talk about information and the freedom of speech, of course, we have to be very, very careful as legislators to go in and making a lot of changes in the mechanisms when it comes to the free spread of information and the freedom of expression. So this is dealt with in this DSA, which we are referring to mostly. But of course, we can come up with ideas, and we will come up with ideas on how to tackle that. Then we have the second point is the foreign financial support to political parties running for elections in the EU member states. Bart was also giving the example of Marine Le Pen in France. We have other examples in other countries. It might not be a big problem in a country like Denmark or even the Netherlands, but for some member states, it's really a big problem. And we know it's very well documented now that the Russians are influencing with financial support. And we need transparency when it comes to this, because we need to know who is supported by whom, and we don't have clear rules for that today, especially not on the EU level, if that's possible. And then, of course, as a third point, we have to look at the vulnerable infrastructure that we are dealing with today. We need to find out how to come up with ideas on how to strengthen these infrastructures. These are the three main issues. Of course, they can go in separate directions. We don't know yet. So far, it has been very big variety of issues and positions and experts coming into our committee. I will lastly, and then I will stop. I will talk a little about the NIS2, which Bart and I are very much involved in from our respective committees. NIS2 is about how we deal with cyber attacks on a European level. I mean, as late as 2016, we got our first draft legislation on this very important issue. And it's not a fault to say that that in 2016 there was a lot of problems dealing with the legislation, common legislation like that, because member states were like, well, this is about intelligence stuff. This is national stuff. We don't want to give away our secrets, our knowledge. So be careful about bringing many obligations into this system. Now, 5 years later, we all know that this was a mistake. We are run over by these problems now, and after 2016 and Brexit and the Trump era, we really see that we need to do something on this, and we have to bring many more authorities and many more companies into the scope. And this is basically what we're doing. We are enlarging the scope very much. A lot of more companies, a lot of more critical infrastructure, a lot of more public authorities have to go into this and have to be, involved in this and have some obligations. And that's the main thing about this. We have enlarged the scope. Then, of course, as a second big thing in this piece of legislation, we need much more reporting obligations. We have to see when we have incidents, and we have that on a daily basis all over Europe. We need the companies and the authorities to bring this into a common registration, so we can learn from each other, and we can be sure that we get the knowledge, so we can avoid these kind of attacks in the future. And this is all too obvious when we're looking at it now, but it's still not the case. I mean, we still don't have this sharing. We are of course developing it very much, also on a private basis. Companies are dealing with it, and governments are dealing with it, but we don't have a common line. We don't have a common framework for this. And that's the main idea with the NIS2. Would that be easy? Well, I say much more easy than 5 years ago, because of course we all get wiser, fortunately. But on the other hand, I can foresee that we will run into the usual suspects and the usual problems when we deal with this in the council. That's to say the member states when they are entering the scene, because this is, of course, sensitive stuff we're dealing with. And many of them will have these kind of automatic reactions and say, no, we can't deal with all these obligations. But on the other hand, and Bart will know much more about this, we have seen some positive signs that we have some movements also within governments to support most of what's coming up. So I'm an optimist, and I hope that this we will succeed in doing this already next year. I think I stop here. We can take questions from them.
Thank you, Morten. And perhaps the problem in the council is as well because some of these governments comes from parties that might. Well,
yeah, you say that. Yeah, you said that. Yeah.
I actually didn't say that, but I almost said that. Yeah, please. We have two members of the European Parliament. We have a lot of knowledge on this issue, and we have actually power to do something about it. Please send your comments or questions in the chat to Tina. And while we wait for that, I'd like to ask you, Bart, because you were talking about Russia and China, and you were mentioning these two states, Russia and China, and that China doubled their kind of army on Facebook and tripled on Twitter since the COVID crisis began. But don't we have others as well? In Denmark, There was a large scandal about the US and the NSA who were actually spying on politicians as the German chancellor, or has been Chancellor Merkel.
Well, I'm not sure if the NSA cooperation with the Danish services is a good example, but I do think that the Iranians, for example, they have a clear agenda here in Europe, influencing the diaspora. You see Turkey stepping up the game, especially in the Balkans, but in some other countries in Eastern Europe as well. It might not be so targeted in Denmark or the Netherlands, but they are a problem. And then Serbia is a problem. Then we have a couple of nations like Qatar, influencing. So it's not just that, but like I said, the birthplace is Russia, and the Internet Research Agency of Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's former butler. It's an entire ecosystem where the Russians, it's not like the Kremlin has a large building where all these people influence our opinions. It's not like that. It's like an ecosystem where every Russians look at what is the tension created in every society in Europe or around the world, and what tension can we exacerbate in order to get something out of it. And that's the way they do it. And then they put it into Sputnik and so Russia Today, and so suddenly a campaign comes in the VKontakte or in Twitter or Facebook. It's more of an ecosystem than there's one evil mind or something. It's just a way of operating. And I think the Chinese have learned from that. If you would down MH17 with all the pressure, you would be able to poison the common information area with 20 or 25 false narratives. No one really knows what is true anymore. And then you would say Putin is probably right. He gets away with it in the public opinion in Russia. And I think that the Chinese have been looking at it and say, that's nice, that's comfortable. It's low risk, low cost, high reward. So that calculus of low cost, low risk, high reward, that needs to be influenced. And I think that we need to influence it through, of course, like Morten is much better on it in the Digital Services Act and how you influence platforms. But I also think that we need to influence Beijing and Moscow by collective countermeasures. You need to collectively address what they are doing, because it's a collective effort to weaken and divide us. And I think that we need an answer to that. Inaction is only enhancing what they're already doing. They feel encouraged if we do nothing.
Yeah.
So that's my stance.
So it's so good and so easy, so it will spread.
Well, yeah, I believe it's easier than much of the other things. It's very cheap and low risk, low cost, high reward.
Yeah.
Same goes for cyber methods. I mean, it's much cheaper. So militaries can operate inside our countries without even having tanks here. It's so much effective, and it's a new way of operation, also a new military dimension, right? And hybrid warfare, for example, I think that if you would look at the NATO discussion and the French defense debate, very important that the EU acknowledges that we have some cards that we hold which are stronger than NATO. If you look at the civilian actions in cyberspace or in the information domain, we have better things. The legislation Morten is working on at DSA, for example, that is really effective in countering disinformation. And NATO does not have those sorts of instruments, and we should be complementary to each other. I'm a big fan of NATO, by the way.
It showed. Tina, we have a question.
Yeah, I got a question from Christopher, and he asked me to read it to you. So what can be done to fight disinformation and cyber attacks against EU member states? Is it possible to agree on sanctions against states financing disinformation and cyber attacks?
Okay, so it's a question on sanctions, and we didn't talk about that yet. Morten Løkkegaard, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can do that, and that's indeed a very good question, because when it comes to how we get after these people, these criminals and these state actors, what can we actually do collectively? That is the key question, and we are of course also digging into this, trying to find out what can be done. I personally have absolutely no doubt that we have to do something. There's a lot of discussion whether sanctions will work or not. I think that's the wrong question to ask, because this is not a matter whether it works or not. The real question is, what is the alternative? Doing nothing? No. We need to set a very clear signal that we will come after these guys and these actors, because as Bart was mentioning just now, otherwise they will just be intrigued, and they will do much more, and they'll say, well, these guys are just too naive, let's just continue. So we need to do something. And the good question, of course, follow-up question will, of course, be what to do. And here, of course, sanctions, in my opinion, is one of the tools that, of course, have to be brought into action. Well, then all kinds of questions pop up, because you, as international lawyers will tell you, this is not just to do that, because what does international law says about these things? Can you do something like that collectively? Well, some will say yes, some will say no. It's I guess the real answer is we don't know, because it's new territory. But I have absolutely no doubt that we have to dig into this and to find ways. And as I see it, it's not only about legal. It's not only legal questions. It's a highly political question. So whatever the legal experts will tell you, you can do it politically. That's my experience. So we have to do something politically. And of course, we have to be on solid ground as much as we can. But let's just face it, right now, we don't know what ground to touch upon and to deal with right now. So I think we are in foreign territory also here, but I think this is the way we have to go.
So we don't know if it works, and we don't know what to do, but we need to do something.
Yeah, and no one has so far been able to explain me what is a good alternative to this. I don't accept nothing. That's my point.
Okay, thank you, Bart.
If I can add, I completely agree with what Morten says. And one of the things is what frustrated me was always when I was in office in the Dutch Ministry of Defense that we say we condemn this and this attack, and we were all on Twitter and the Dutch MFA and the Danish MFA, and then nothing happened. And that's like communicating you don't accept it, but with no follow-up, with no actual costs. That's communicating there is no norm. Whereas you want to communicate there is a norm, you need to follow up with something that actually costs something. And it might not be as effective as you want it to be, but there other things can come in place as well, additionally. And I think it's a way of looking at cyberspace, for example, is by one of the great things that the Commission has proposed, but it's not yet in place, but which I do endorse, is a DNS capability. So DNS is if you would look up a website, Løkkegaard.dk, you would type it in the browser, it would translate that address to an IP address. Now, that is DNS, domain name server. But if you know, for example, a large-scale cyber attack is coming up, because that was a question of Christopher, and if you know upfront this domain is used, or this IP address, this server is being used, why are we resolving it? So if you are at home and you click on an email, a spear phishing email, then you will get, instead of being infected, you would get 404, page not found, bad server, bad error. And that's fine, because then you're protected. And I think that we need such a capability across Europe. Many service providers already offer it to their customers. And I do think that we need to feed it with more cyber threat intelligence. So, and that is good to do it on a European level. So whether you have a business in, whether you're in Greece or you're in Denmark, it doesn't matter. You click on an email or you're being attacked, it doesn't resolve. That's very effective. And that is punishment by denial. It's not, let's say, a deterrence by denial. It's not deterrence by punishment. Deterrence by punishment in a nuclear theory, that doesn't work in cyberspace, I agree. But this deterrence by denial actually could work. So we need new ways of countering it. We're in a new age, new digital age. We need new answers, and we're thinking about what works, and the effectiveness, we'll see. But we have to try something.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned MFA as well. That is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Well, there's a lot of letters in today, so I just want to explain. Tina, we have more questions.
Yes, we have a question from Hanne, and Hanne asks, why is there this consensus that one has a right to a digital social life as long as the platforms are based on multinational finance business interests? Why is there this idea that Mark Zuckerberg's platforms are democratic? They are not. Why fool people to think that politicians are responsible to inform about these platforms, how they work? Yeah.
Morten, this would be Margrethe Vestager from your party dealing with Facebook. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm just fighting to find a question in what we just heard. What was the question?
Well, it was a comment. Is Facebook? Well, is politicians able to do something about Facebook when it's not democracy? Then not.
Yeah. Okay, but that was some arguable positions in the premises of this question. But anyway, this comment. But anyway, I think it's a valid point that we have to do something with these platforms. And of course, the whole DSA as such is an answer to that. To again realizing that we are all too late and too little about this for many years, and it's no coincidence that Margrethe Vestager is key figure in this, because some of you would remember that in her former life she was commissioner for competition law, and she was actually one of the first to take up the fight with these tech giants, and she did that pretty successfully. Some would say she was not winning each and every lawsuit, but she was the first on that level to take up the fight and to realize that we have to do something in order to get the balance. So now she has the responsibility for the whole area within the commission. And this is, of course, good news, because I have not only because she's part of our political family, but also because she's a very wise lady, and she has a very, very good political nose, and she knows what's going on and what it takes to actually move on with this. So what are we doing in DSA? We are trying to and the DMA, I might add. Just for explanation, this division is made originally because we need in the DMA. The Digital Market Act, we need to still do something on a legal basis with this competition situation, where we have almost like monopoly situation. And of course, this is part of the problem, that we have the tendency for capital and companies to centralize and to capitalize and to be bigger and bigger, and by doing that, ruin the competition, which in the end is the common good for us, every one of us as consumers and as citizens. So we need the competition, and we really need to reinstall real competition in this area. That's also what I couldn't feel in the question or the comment we just heard, that we need real competition, and how to make that is the political question here. And what we're doing is, of course, in the Digital Market Act, to define these big actors. It's actually quite a nice piece of legislation. It only concerns 5 or 10 companies, namely the big tech giants, and setting up some kind of framework and rulings for them, some obligations. DSA is more for the rest of us. It concerns, as we were just talking about, the widespread lack of responsibility, you could say, which is now the order of the day. I mean, let's just take products. You can have all kinds of illegal products spread through this marketplace, which is Facebook and Google and what have you. And let's just add one example. You are a parent in Denmark. You have a kid, and you are buying some Chinese toys, and these toys are filled up with toxic plastic and what have you, and this can be sold without any control on these platforms today. And this is not if you saw them in a store, you would have all kinds of regulations, but not if they are sold on these marketplaces. And this is of course not okay. We need to do something about it, and that is one part of it. But it's not only about products; it's also about information. It's also about what's going on with the as Bart said, it's not only a market, it's also a public sphere. And here it's much more difficult, because you can do very specific thing with products and everyone would agree, but when it comes to statements and debate and hate speech and things like that, what can we do as legislators? And we are trying to find the balance. We are trying to say to these big techs, you need to be responsible for the things that actually are spread on your platforms. You need to get rid of it if it's illegal. You need to have some kind of monitoring. This is already taking place because we already have some kind of cooperation with Facebook and others. But we need to be much more strict, and these have to be much more responsible. And we have to find out what kind of legislative tools we can take on board, getting to this point.
Thank you. But Morten mentioned the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. So you're negotiating this now. What is the time frame? And well, I suppose you try to improve them. How?
Well, Morten is negotiating it, so he could say more about the time frame. But what I'd like to say is, so I agree with what Morten says, and I think that what is very important from us liberals is that we view this a little bit different than some of the other parties, because I fully agree with what Morten says. We come up with democratic values. What is our democratic value on social media when it comes to the information space and public sphere? And I believe that governments should uphold the policies. They should make policy based on those democratic values, and those policies should be upheld. And here comes the debate. Should it be upheld by us, politicians? Should it be upheld by governments? No, it should be upheld independently. That's it. So we don't want Viktor Orban or the Polish government to uphold the social media sphere in their country. That would not be beneficial for liberal democracy. So we're looking at ways to do that independently. That is the debate right now. One more thing on the Chinese toys is, I think you're completely right to ban that from entering our nations. But I, from a cybersecurity perspective, I have grave concerns about that as well. One of the great things is that Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the Union speech, actually said, if they are connected, those toys, if they have a Wi-Fi connection, a Bluetooth connection, they will be subjugated to new legislation. Cyber Resilience Act, it's called, where all these devices are being subjugated to new European standards, and that we will not accept these cheap internet of, oh, you're recording this, it's the internet of things. I sometimes call it the internet of shit. Don't record it, don't cut that out. But you need good, secure devices, because you can have a nice connected pulled pork machine in your kitchen, but it's also a way that people can hack inside your own home, and it's very important that we keep that safe. And I'm glad that the Commission will put forward such a new legislative proposal somewhere in January. That I know, but you know more about the DSA and DMA.
Well, I'm not happy to answer that question, because when it comes to negotiations, it's all everyone's guess. I don't think that they will. It will take some time. This is a very, very complicated stuff, and it's fair to say that we don't have absolute consensus in the House on this. There are many tricky questions. So I foresee, and on top of that, of course, we will have the trialogue later on, and the member states involved in the shop. So I don't foresee that we will see something within a year and 1.5 years. I think we will have to be patient, because we have to get this right.
Okay, we'll wait and see. Thank you. Bart, you were mentioning Viktor Orban and Kaczynski in Poland. And earlier you were mentioning fake news and Lügenpresse, and that you would like to guard journalists and protect journalists. But we do have a lot of problems with that inside the European Union as well. And I know we were discussing attacks from the outside on European member states, but we do have a lot of problems with press freedom inside. I think Bulgaria is number 112 on the press freedom index of 180 countries in the world, and Poland and Hungary. So isn't these things interconnected? Don't we have to deal with that as well?
The rule of law debate is only just begun. And I think that we're perfectly capable of solving it, but it's a long-term effort. Like anything in Europe, it goes a bit slow, but if we set our mind to it, we will succeed. And we will solve it ourselves. And what we do not need, for example, is for foreign governments like Israel, and I'm a friend of Israel, a big friend of Israel, but for Israel to sell Pegasus spyware to Viktor Orban or to the Polish, or anyone with a rule of law problem. That we do not need. So I would call on my Israeli friends, and I will be doing that in a very nearby with Knesset members, to stop exporting to such countries. You can export it to any country in Europe, but it can't export it to rule of law problems. Israel should help us to build democracy and strengthen it, and just like we help them do so. And it's the other way around as well. I want from them I want a better commitment, and I say that as a friend of Israel. And I'm usually very positive. So, but listen, the rule of law debate is not over yet, and we will succeed. There's a connection now with funds. There's a connection with other mechanisms, penal mechanisms, and I think there's a great effort. And I think it's being led by the Renew Group, right? It's Venstre, it's VVD, it's other parties calling for it.
But Pegasus is commercial. It's a private company.
Yes, it is. It is a private company, but it's the export is being granted by the Minister of Defense in Israel. So it's a government decision. And for example, Denmark and the Netherlands are part of the Wassenaar agreements for dual-use goods, and we can't export it to countries like Hungary. And it has a reason, because we committed ourselves to human rights standards, and the Israelis have not, the Chinese have not, and the US has not, but the rest, there's many countries present at that state. And I would like Israel to sign the agreement, but they will not. And listen, it's fine. But listen, one more remark. If you would say Pegasus software, hacking into phones, into software, we shouldn't be able to sell it. I disagree, because they are legitimate counter-terrorism targets. They are legitimate counter-espionage targets. We need, government agencies need to be in communications from time to time. And you don't want every nation in the European Union or in the world to develop their own zero-day factory to hack into these phones. It will only make the internet far worse off. It's better than for such sales to be allowed than to forbid them.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
Because I think it's a very interesting debate, this one about private versus public. And I think one of the tendencies that is very clear today, and this digital era has just added to that, is that this old-fashioned discussion about private versus public is, I think it's a little odd, and because what we see is now is that, and NIS2 is a good example of that, that we as legislators are doing our utmost to make obligations for both private companies and authorities to work better together, because the threats are global, the threats are cross-border by nature. So we don't have the luxury to have this old debate about this is a private company and this is an authority. Of course, we need the market. Everyone, even the Chinese, realizes that the market is the place. Competition is the thing. But on top of that, we need antitrust laws. We need very close cooperation, and we need very sharp legislation to deal with this. So this is not contradiction in my point of view. This is the way of the world. This is the way things are going, and we need to realize that and to make the best out of it, instead of entering into this old-fashioned debate.
Thank you, Tina.
Yes, we got a question from Rai Singh Tanwar. Can you please turn on your microphone, Rai?
Rai, do you have a question? Rai Tanwar, do you have a question? Please turn on your microphone.
Otherwise, I'll just read it out loud. He writes, Europe seriously lacks the technology talent that can deal with threats from the countries who have got vested interest and talented resources to do it. What is Europe doing to get the right talent that can fight these new world threats?
Yes, please, Morten.
Well, I think I will challenge that question a little bit, because I'm not sure that we are lacking talent in Europe. What we are lacking is volume. We need and cooperation so that we can deal with China and the US in this competition. What I've heard from Margrethe Vestager when we talked about this earlier on was that of course we can be in this game, but we need to be better to build up places, universities, environments whereby we can foster this talent that we already have, so that it does not escape to other parts of the world because the conditions are better in the US, the better universities, or the salary is better, or whatever. We need to build up this factory of talent within Europe, because we have the talent, but we're not able to keep it here in Europe because we don't have the cooperation within Europe on this issue.
Thank you. I think Margrethe Vestager was saying that we need 20 million IT specialists in 2030, and now we have 12. And if we do nothing, we will have 13. But we do have some time now. So you will be suggestion for education. Bart.
Yeah. Well, yes. Listen, finding educative people is very interesting, but it's also the way you manage them. I've worked with IT specialists for a long time, and so you pay them so they tell you what is good management. they pay their manager. They tell their manager what he should do, and it's a very bottom-up way of working. And I think that many of the Western European countries are much better positioned in that. If you have a traditional way of working and managing, it is a comparative disadvantage in the IT sphere, because these people might be 20 years of age, not even graduated, but they might be much smart. They might outsmart anyone with a higher pay grade. It's very interesting to see that dynamic flowing through. Yeah.
Thank you. Tina?
Yeah, I have a question from Christopher. How should the coming EU legislation regulating online platforms try to control political advertising from foreign states?
So that's in the Digital X as well, about foreign ads. Bart, would you like to start?
Yes, well, very much. This is a very, very good question. And I think that, first of all, let's start with a technical problem. The technical problem is the advertisement market. It is a very difficult market to understand. We had a Coca-Cola representative in our committee, Morten and I, and they said if we would give $1 million, we said, to advertisements across the spectrum, they would sell $1 million to advertisements. About $150,000 or $200,000 would come on this information websites by itself, because it is very untransparent how these advertisements are being sold and to whom. The libraries, the ad libraries, how they are being built up, and on what basis you are targeted, you cannot see as a customer. We want to improve that as well. So if you have an advertisement of any political party, you could see this is why I was being targeted. It's not just, oh, this shows up and I'm in a bubble all of a sudden. The second thing is, I think that a form of pluralism is needed. We need pluralism in journalism, media, and I think if you have a social media environment and the mass population would only consume, or the majority would only consume news through social media, it's very, very important that they get a plural message, not stay in their bubble, not go down the rabbit hole and end up in jihadist or extreme left or extreme right. You have to see a plural outage of the electoral campaigns that are out there. So that's very important, because if we do that in the physical sphere, we should do that in the digital sphere. So that's what I would.
And how do we do that? How do we do that, Bart? Well,
in the Digital Services Act, there are a couple of codes of practice being negotiated with the social media companies. If they don't adhere, there can be further disadvantages for them. And then that code is voluntary, sure, and it hasn't worked that well. We are trying to get more of a stick to it than just a carrot. So, but in the new DSA, there's a new stick. If you don't really cooperate, you are being you have disadvantages as a company. You have more scrutiny. But I also think that it's important that we clear up these ad libraries, that people can see themselves where this came from. It's also very important. And with the foreign, let's say, political party financing should also be well. And I think it's also very important that we can see who spent what on advertisements.
And sorry, what is that? An ad library? Could you explain that?
It is the way that it's a technical facility, a technical database in which researchers can see what ads are being sold, to what price, to what consumers, and what groups. And it's also a way of saying how did this or that influence a certain opinion. And we have to standardize those ad libraries, make it more transparent, and the algorithms that feed into them, make them transparent, and have some scrutiny to it. Let's see if we could vet it in some way. That's up to the people in DSA and DMA. Yeah.
Thank you.
That would be. Can I just add to that, because I totally agree. But I think that we haven't talked today so much about the algorithms, and they are, of course, in the center of this debate, because although it's hopelessly technical, and I avoided it as long as I could, I have to realize, like many of my colleagues, that we have to go into this area and to discuss it with the platforms themselves, and to be when the day comes, we have to be pretty clear in our understanding that these algorithms are the key to the question. We have to get some kind of transparency when it comes to the algorithms. I'm totally aware also as a liberal that, of course, companies need to be able to keep their secrets, their business secrets, in order to have a business model. And that goes without saying. But these companies are so big. They are almost too big to fail. And so much is at stake. So, and we have been waiting for 10, 15 years now to get them themselves to come up with some decent models on how to deal with these things. And they have not been able to so far. And I know why now. I'm a little wiser than I was 5 years ago. I know now that this is because of the algorithms. We need to get into these algorithms and have some transparency, so we can at least to some extent and on some parts of the way being able to make some rulings and some regulation when it comes to the obligations for companies to share something with the rest of us. And that then Bart was mentioning, people from universities, scientists, people from the public, from some kind of authorities, health companies, and whatever, so they can be helpful. Because otherwise, and I think they're starting to realizing this now, the CEOs of these companies, they're starting to realize if they don't do it, what will be the alternative? That will be chaos, and that will be that their business model will disappear, will be disintegrated, will be some kind of ruined anyway, because this is too big to not to deal with also from themselves now.
Thank you, Morten Løkkegaard. NIS2, DSA, DMA, MFA, transparency, state sanctions, algorithms. We did get smarter today as well. Thanks a lot, Morten Løkkegaard, for joining us. Thank you, Bart Groothuis. It was an honor, really. So thank you and take care.